Can I just say welcome to everybody, and if anybody's got a mobile phone, they would please turn it off or put it on silent for me. I don't know what's happened here. I think everyone's worried about me giving them COVID. Everyone's left the seats blank. Anyway, I'm taking my mask off to talk because it's a little difficult otherwise. We're here today to say farewell and pay our respects to John Martin Waite. We want to celebrate his life, but also remember him. And there is sadness. We're all here to do today what none of us really want to do, but as hard as it is, we need to say our goodbyes to John. You're overwhelmed by the mystery and death that you experienced in the mystery and death of John, and you come together today as family and friends. All have shared time with him over the years, and we come here to celebrate his life. You remember happy times, sad times, the things you shared with John over the years. We gather here also to support each other as you grieve over your relative and friend. My name is Rick Hall. I'm certainly honoured to be asked to officiate this service for John today, and on behalf of the family, I want to thank you all for being here. It's certainly a comfort to them to have your love and support today. Death in a number of ways does bring us all together. Each have obliged for a time to set aside our commitments to work and daily routine to come together to farewell John. We all share a common bond of love and respect for him. It is fitting at this time we should reflect on a life that's been and to remember the things we've received from our ancestors. How immense, how deep is our debt to the past, how much thankfulness we owe to the goodness, the intelligence, the energy of men and women who have gone before us. How very few of our ancestors have we known, yet we derive from our very life, our health, our stories, our learning, our all. We all know John's tie-up with musicals, so at this stage we're going to play one of the songs that would be from one of the many musicals that he was involved with. So we'll listen to that now.
Alle Kunst
In a moment, I'm going to just give you a little précis of John's life, and then a couple of people are going to follow me. And after that, I will give the opportunity to anyone who wishes to say a couple of words. But first, I want to read you this little poem or story which tells you what we're going to talk about, and it's called The Dash. I read of a man who stood to speak at the funeral of a friend. He referred to the dates on the tombstone from the beginning to the end. He noted that first came the date of birth, but spoke the following date, the date of death, with tears. But he said what mattered most of all was that dash between those years, for the dash represents all the time that he spent alive on earth, and only those who truly loved him know what this little line is worth. For it matters not how much we own, the cars, the house, the cash. What matters is how we spend our dash. So think about it long and hard and the things you'd like to change, for you never know how much time is left. You could be at dash, mid-range. If you could just slow down enough to consider what is true and real, and always try to understand the way other people feel. And be less quick to anger and show appreciation more, and love the people in our lives if we've never loved them before. If we treat each other with respect and more often wear a smile, remembering this little dash may only last a while. So when your eulogy's being read with your life's actions to rehash, would you be proud of what people say about how you spent your dash? And I know everyone here is very proud of John's dash, and I'll give you a little of it now. John Martin Waite was born on the 25th of February 1935 at the Una Hospital, Corio Street in Shepparton. He was the youngest child of 11 of Henry or Harry John Waite and Janet Hannah Waite, née Smith. He had a brother William, deceased, Frida, deceased, Gertrude, deceased, Robert also, Cyril, Harold, Sylvia, deceased, then Joyce, not deceased, Shirley, deceased, and Donald, deceased. He did his early schooling. He attended the state school in Friars Street, which became the girls' school and now TAFE, I believe, and then Shepparton High School. He completed compulsory national service between the years of 1954 and 57, working in the catering group corp. Lived most of his life in Shepparton, apart from a brief time when he worked for his brother Bill in Melbourne, and I think they built some iceworks in Maui. John was a devoted son and cared for his mother until she passed away in 1985. He was a fireman for the Victorian Railways during the 1950s and was a lifetime lover of steam engines and locomotives. And this is just a list of some of his occupations. He commenced employment as a technician in 1964 with the PMG. Worked out at Mount Major for many years, maintaining the transmitters on site for the ABC. Moved to Radio Australia upon the automation of that facility. He took redundancy in 1993 as a senior technical officer, grade 2 from Telecom Australia Broadcasting Division. He spent most of his working life mostly around radio and TV, but in the 50s he worked on the as a steam train stoker on the GV Seymour Shepparton line. He married Maria, née Mackenzie, on the 25th of February 1985. Maria is a trained opera singer, so no doubt they had that in common. They shared a love of classical music and opera. John and Maria first met when they were young. Maria won a major singing competition and travelled overseas to Paris to pursue her musical career. They kept in contact and correspondence about the music while Maria was overseas. When Maria returned to Australia in 1985, they were married at Mount Major under the gum tree on John's 50th birthday. John studied singing in Melbourne, where he was mainly interested in Lyra. He possessed a fine baritone voice. He was principal singer in many of musical productions, and some of his accomplishments with the Shepparton Light Music Company, he played the role of Curly in Oklahoma. And this is a quote. John Waite has a magnificent singing voice. He also has a major talent in set and costume design. His sets for previous Tatura Male Choir productions have been breathtaking, bringing gasps of amazement from the audience on more than one occasion, notably the Mikado and Die Fledermaus. Please excuse me if I pronounce some of these words incorrectly. The set for Yeoman of the Guard is no exception. The Tatura Male Choir production would have had much more inferior shows if it were not for the tremendous settings, and the company is indeed fortunate to have his talent. And that's a quote from a booklet or leaflet, A Jewel in the Valley, the Tatura Male Choir and Churiton Music Company by Jeff Baker, president of the Churiton Music Company, 1997 to 2004. And some of his involvements in musicals, as you all know, he was involved in many, and again I'm going to have trouble pronouncing a couple of these. In 1969, the Mikado, Pish Tush, is that correct? A Noble Lord, set design and artwork. 1970, Iolanthe, Private Willis, set design and artwork. In 1971, the Gypsy Baron, Graf von Hominy, set design. Die Fledermaus, artwork. The Yeoman of the Guard, artwork, set design, custom research and design. The Desert Song, set design and artwork. 1984, HMS Pinafore, set design and artwork. And 1987, Brigadoon, artistic director, stage dressing, sets and costumes. And that's probably only some, there would be others I imagine. Competed at the Royal South Street Society Ballarat in the early 1970s and won a number of awards, prizes for his singing. John, as probably some of you know, was a cat lover. Charlie the Bengal and Mr. Red, a stray red tabby that adopted him, being two of his favourite of many cats that he owned over the years. He was a self-taught chef, although from when I read about his army career or national service career, they did put him in the cooking section, so maybe had something to do with that. Designed his nephew Fred's wedding cake. He liked golf. He was an active golfer and a member of the Mooroopna Golf Club, an accomplished oil and watercolours painter, a very keen photographer who developed his own prints. He learned how to tune pianos and was involved with the Australian National Piano Awards, Shepherd, along with Maria, who was one of the three founders. He helped his English cousin George Waite trace the history of the Waite family and compiled an extensive family tree. John was a remarkable man, so much talent in many ways, and I know he'll be missed by friends and family, and I don't think he could be replaced, but will live in your hearts, of so many. Rest in peace, John. And now I'm going to ask his nephew Brad, who's put most of this together, to come up and just tell us a little bit more of him.
I just want to firstly acknowledge my mother Joy, who's John's sister. She's in aged care along with her husband John on the Mornington Peninsula. We actually haven't told Mum about John's passing because her husband John lost his sister just a few days prior to John passing away, and we just thought it was too much sad news to tell them at present. Also, I'd like to mention my brother Paul, who lives in New South Wales. He dearly wished to be here today, but couldn't make it because of the border closures. He's watching the live stream, as is my younger brother Peter, who unfortunately couldn't make it either. So I just want to sort of mention them, obviously, and my mother, and also mention anyone else who couldn't make it. When we were boys, our Uncle John was a major influence on our lives. He would often travel to Melbourne to visit us which we look forward to with great anticipation. My father, Alf, and John were great mates, and Mum always loved seeing her baby brother. When our family moved to Port Fairy in Western Victoria back in the early 70s, I remember we went to Port Campbell for a day trip with John. At the blowhole, he convinced Mum to stand a little bit closer just when the wave was about to crash. He could be quite mischievous at times. In later years, my visits to Shepparton were both memorable and very enjoyable, travelling up on Friday afternoons rather, after work, and having a few beers and a chat with John at the Terminus Hotel before returning home to Sir Braun Street, where he would serve up a magnificent dinner at midnight. Also remember, John had many different cars over the years. I remember Holdens, Mazdas, and a collection of Minis waiting patiently to be restored. My first recollection was an MG in the barn, which I used to sit in and pretend I was a racing car driver. Unfortunately, some time later, he took it apart, and that was the end of my racing career. On one occasion, as a young boy, I remember being with him on a drive in his brand new Mazda. He didn't take too kindly at being overtaken by a Citroen, so he pulled over and told me to fasten my seatbelt. We soon caught up to that Citroen and left it far behind, much to my great delight. John loved music, as Rick's indicated, and he was particularly fond of opera and lieder music. Over the years, he would inquire as to what I was listening to, and we would compare notes, discussing different types of music, singers, recordings, just about anything to do with music. In the last few years, I searched the internet, particularly YouTube, to find videos of current baritone singers. I would then play pieces of music to him over the telephone for his enjoyment and opinion. I found his depth of knowledge was amazing, and I learnt so much from him. John was kind, incredibly clever, very artistic and wonderful company. He used to call me Braddo. He was Jono, my remarkable and lovable uncle. I will never forget you. Thank you.
And what I did admit, and after Brad just mentioned, I also want to welcome those of you who are watching on the live stream. And now Fred's going to come up and just say a few words. Thanks, Fred. Another nephew. A lot of nephews and nieces.
My memories of John are friendship, fun, good cheer. I'll never lose those thoughts. That was John. John was my uncle. He's only 6 years older than I am. We grew up together, and I cannot remember any time in my life where John wasn't there. Going back to when I was 8, I might have been 7, I went into Nana's in Sir Brown Street in Shepparton, and John was old enough to have odd jobs. So he had some finances, he had a bit of money, and he said to me, do you want to go down to the dairy and I'll buy you a malted milk? Now, the malted milks at the dairy, which was up near the Terminus Hotel, were sublime. Yes. Minutes later, we were down sitting in the dairy, plonk, 2 lovely malteds. I was just about to get into mine and he stopped me. And he said, if you can beat me, if you can finish your drink before me, I'll buy you another one tomorrow. That was a good deal, I thought. So he said, go, and I went for it. 2, 3 minutes maybe, and I was down to the slurp. Finished. And I looked up and he hadn't even started. And he's looking at me, and I sat there for an eternity while he slowly savoured every last drop of this beautiful malted, stopping every couple of seconds to give me a running account of how wonderful it was and how beautiful it tasted and how nice and cold. That was John. Saw that sort of thing all the time. I have a letter from my sister, and I will read that. Every nephew or niece in the room will identify and understand and know these things. Brad's, I think, about 18 years younger than I am, so there's a bit of John's life that we can talk about. So what my sister has written says what I think we all identify with. John was a wonderful extrovert and with a real zest for life. He had a great laugh and always tried to see and share the funny side of life. My sister's not quite right there, because John was only an extrovert with people that he knew well. That's why all those achievements that Ricky read out, I spoke with him at length about it on a number of occasions. Why don't you go on the stage? John had a voice that could have taken him on the world stage. No, I only do it for myself. And in that respect, he was private. So when he was in the public, he was much more introverted. John was 5 years, as my sister, 5 years older than me, and was always like an exciting big brother. When I was little, he drew colourful pictures for me and told me exciting and funny stories about them. He always laughed with great gusto, and I loved joining in. One of my early memories of John was at the end of World War II. It was actually about the end of 1946, when we were at Nana Waite's house. Fred, John and I were standing near the kitchen fireplace, and there were a few adults in the kitchen as well. 2 men walked in, one in khaki and the other in navy blue. John pointed to the man in blue and said, "That's your dad." The other man was Uncle Cyril. For Fred and I, that was the first time we remember seeing our father. John then told us that Dad was home to stay and that he'd been away overseas at war. John loved to cook. In school holidays, he would occasionally ride his bike out to our place and cook something for our lunch. John was a cook long before he was involved in the army, long before. He enjoyed making us toad in the hole. Toad in the hole, lots of different varieties of toad in the hole. What this was a dry stale slice of bread, hole pushed in the middle of it, dip in milk both sides, flop into a hot frying pan, break an egg into the hole, cook it a bit, turn it, cook it more, toad in the hole. Omelettes, scrambled eggs and all sorts of spicy things on toast. I remember he came out one Sunday and made stuffed capsicums for our tea. That was very unusual for a meal for Australians in the late 1940s. John was still a teenager. As an adult, I always enjoyed being invited to dinner at John's. It usually started early and went very late. There would be cooking utensils and dishes all over the kitchen. He particularly liked to make very hot curry. To eat the curry, John would wind a towel around his neck and have a second towel at hand because he would perspire so profusely as soon as he started to eat. He would be mopping his face saying, "I love hot curry, but I can never eat it in public." I also remember John making a crystal set, and he would talk to people in other parts of Australia. My sister's wrong there. He did make crystal sets, lots of them. But he also built a ham radio station and got a ham radio broadcaster's license, and that was what my sister heard people all over the world on. I found it fascinating. His interest in communication led to him working at fixing radios and television sets, and later to his work as a technician at the ABC. John loved music and opera and took singing lessons for several years and later taught singing. It was always a joy to hear him burst into song from an opera or from Gilbert and Sullivan. He would sometimes make up funny lyrics for the songs he was singing just to entertain his listeners and make them laugh. Another great love John had was for steam trains and engines. He worked on steam trains for a number of years and actually became my sister said driver, he wasn't, he was a fireman. He was very knowledgeable about trains and studied the history and development of steam trains and loved to discuss them with anyone who was interested. John was very artistic, and as well as studying and listening to music and singing, he was skilled at drawing and painting. He also had a great flair for cake decorating and beautifully decorated my wedding cake. That's my sister's wedding cake, also mine. So he did at least two. On the occasions I travelled back to Victoria, John always took an interest in any jewellery I wore. He would study it closely and comment on the colour and design and what it was made of and ask me who made it. After I moved to our new land farm in Western Australia, he would sometimes write to me or sometimes chat to us on the audio tapes Mum and Dad sent. When we eventually got a phone, John would occasionally ring and he would check to see how things were going with my family and my teaching job and with clearing and developing our farm and later the building of our home. That's a familiar thing for all. Brad talked about it. John made himself available and in contact with all the nieces and nephews. He would ask about how our farm was developing and later the building of our home. And then the next time he rang, he would ask specific questions to check on what progress we had made. He would also tell me outrageously funny stories. He always ended his calls by saying, "Toodle pip." John was a very artistic, skilled and knowledgeable man with a wonderful zest for living and enriched my life with his enduring friendship and the many marvellous memories of much joy and great belly laughs and long and fascinating conversations across the decades. From me and from my sister, Toodle Pip John. Just before I leave you, about the cooking, I was again very young. It was before I knew about toads and holes. And John was out at our place, that's out on the settlement, and we were riding bikes just before lunch. And he stopped me and he said, you know what you're getting for lunch? And I said, no. And he said, you're getting toad in a hole. And in great alarm I said, why? What have I done now? But that was John through and through. Thank you, Ricky.
Well, he certainly had many talents, and he not just had those talents, he was brilliant at almost anything he put his mind to. But just anybody else did want to say a word? I know that's probably putting it on someone pretty quickly, but if anyone would like to just say something. We've got Chris coming up. Another cousin. There's a lot of cousins. I didn't know you had so many, Chris.
Thanks.
Never thought of a word either, Chris.
What was I going to say?
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Said to him, now, will you do it?
You'll need that, Fred. This is going to be good. Thanks, Brad and Fred, for those terrific words that you've spoken about, John. The reason I actually got up is because you both reminded me when you talked about the cars of a massive lesson I learnt in life due to John Waite. And it was the meaning of fear. Right? Now, when I was a little boy, one day my mother, who could deliver a very direct message, said to me, "You're going to Melbourne tomorrow." Ah, now this was you've got to understand with a little bit of background how big this was. We were a family with a mum and a good tribe of kids and no car, and no travels and no real experience about going places. Well, I certainly didn't have, and I was the youngest. "You're going to Melbourne tomorrow." Oh, right. How? Why? Because John Waite's going down and he's driving his car and it's a long way and he may fall asleep at the wheel. Oh, no. I've got thousands of memories of John, like everybody, but I'll never forget the fear. He may fall asleep at the wheel. I didn't even understand properly what a car was, but falling asleep at the wheel had to be bad. So the next morning, I think I was delivered to Sabron Street somehow, or he picked me up, I can't remember. And we set off on this fearsome journey. And I remember, I can't tell you what brand of car it was. Fred, you might remember, but it was sort of vintage. It might have been a Riley or something like that. It had panels, flat panels on the side, and plenty of vinyl and stuff, windows that flapped a bit, and you can't think of it. We got to Nagambie, and that's as far as we got. The car broke down. John spent the entire day in that cream brick garage that's on the right side of what was then the highway going to Melbourne. And I spent the day doing what I did really well as a kid, walking all over Nagambie and seeing what the town was about, checking out the lake and all that sort of thing. So that was genuinely a lesson that I learnt from one of my experiences with John. He's been very generous to me too in many ways, as he has been to many of the others in the family. He's provided me with a lot of great discussion about music, and he ordered beautiful CD sets of Fritz Wunderlich and people like this from overseas, and I got this for you. I've got a very good friend in Geelong who has had a career all over the world. He's a magnificent singer. He's taught many of the leading singers in Australia, and he's got some great students right now. And he's a brilliant baritone, and I've played that man singing for John in his aged care facility, and he loves his voice. We've talked about it. And I remember taking one of the pieces of music that was on a Fritz Wunderlich CD, telling Roger about it, the background, John, and playing a certain piece, and I was told you turn a circle when this happens, and it works. So you come back, you've had a breath, and Roger burst into tears because the music was so beautiful and just moved him that much. And these are the sort of gifts John just gave out, nonchalantly. So I was inspired by the story about the cars to just get up and let you know about that other little story. But I'm glad to have come back into John's life late in life, after living away for quite a period of time, and it's really good to see the family that are here today, and we were blessed to have him.
Thanks very much, Chris. Well, Chris, you did get some of your singing skills from him, obviously, so it runs through the family. I've heard Chris sing, and he's a very beautiful singer as well. Was there anyone else? Yep. Usually I can't get anybody to come up when I ask like that, so I'm very pleased.
Hi everybody. I'll be very, very brief. I'm Jeff Wyland. I worked with John out at Mount Major at the TV site there for many years, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to just say a few words. I remember John had a great sense of humour, as I think most of you know, and we both had a love of a lot of the old English comedy shows, and I had some Goon shows. I don't know how many people here remember the Goons, but Goon shows, Monty Python, and I'd take some tapes out sometimes and we'd listen to those. And John would be chuckling away, and that'd turn into belly laughs and guffaws and riotous laughter. He loved a good joke and a bit of humour. His other love, and you've spoken a lot about food and his cooking, and I can attest to his love of very hot curry. I think it was at the very high end of the hot scale. And I can remember watching John eating his curry, and his face was getting redder and redder, and his head got red, and then the perspiration just poured down his cheeks and his forehead. And I'd say, John, I reckon that's too hot. I think you'll do yourself some damage. It's going to burn your throat or your vocal cords or something. Oh, it's lovely, he said. I love it. It's beautiful. And then he'd finish it for the last bit and then head off downstairs to splash water on his face and cool himself down a bit. But look, we had great times out at Mount Major. We were a fairly small group out there, but we all got on pretty well together, very well together really. And John was a very big part of that. And there are some from Radio Australia, from Mount Major who are here today, and also from Radio Australia, where they got to know John when we moved our office from Mount Major down to Radio Australia later in the piece. But look, I can speak on behalf of those who are here and some who I contacted who apologised they couldn't come. Michael Haywood is one who's up in Queensland, and there's no way he could get down here for this, but I'm sure he would have loved to have been here. But I can speak, I think, on their behalf in just passing on our commiserations and sympathy to the family, and we appreciate the opportunity of coming along, being able to come along and pay our respects and just say our farewell to John. So I'll just finish by saying thanks for the memories, John, and farewell, and just rest in peace, old friend. Thank you.
No, you're right. Thank you for that. Does anyone else wish to say something? I've got a lot of different notes here, and if people talk too long, well, I don't use all of it, but this one I want to read to you. I think this poem is very appropriate. A life that matters. Ready or not, someday it will all come to an end. There'll be no more sunrises, no minutes, hours or days. All the things you've collected, whether treasured or forgotten, will pass to someone else. Your wealth, fame, temporal power will shrivel to irrelevance. It will not matter what you owned or what was owed to you. Your grudges, resentments, frustrations and jealousies will all disappear. So too your hopes, ambitions, plans and to-do lists will expire. The wins and losses that once seemed so important will fade away. It won't matter where you came from. It won't matter whether you were beautiful or brilliant. Even your gender and skin colour will be irrelevant. So what will matter? What will matter is not what you brought, but what you built. Sorry, I took a bit bad writing. What will matter is not what you bought, and I think these parts are part of John, but what you built. Not what you got, but what you gave. What will matter is not your success, but your significance. What will matter is not what you learnt, but what you taught. What will matter is every act of integrity, compassion, courage or sacrifice that enriched, empowered or encouraged others to emulate your example. What will matter is not your competence, but your character. What will matter is not how many people you knew, but how many will feel a lasting loss when you are gone. What will matter is not your memories, but the memories who lived on in others who loved you. What will matter is not how long you'll remember for what you did. Living a life that matters does not happen by accident. It's a matter of choice. And I believe John did live a life that mattered. Now, we've heard a number of stories and a little bit of a history of John's life, and now we're going to bring to you a photo presentation of some photos that were put together, and you'll listen to the music, You Are Calm, in English. I can't read it in whatever else it's in there, which was one of his favourite songs. And some of these may make you feel a little sad, but I hope some of them bring a smile to your face. Thanks. John put a lot of time into anything he was involved in, and you'll notice the And you saw that picture on the screen there before. He actually grew that beard, for, I believe, for one of his musicals he was involved in, so he went the whole way. Funerals are a time when we reflect on a life that's been, and for some of you it may be a prayer, for others some quiet contemplation, for others maybe just looking out a window and thinking. As you spend time in this reflection, here are some thoughts. Look back over John's life as you knew him and remember what you received from him. Be thankful for the life he lived, what his life meant to you, your life meant to him, and the many other lives that he touched, and the experiences life gave him, and the many changes over the years he experienced. You remember the life he lived, the home he made, the joys and disappointments that life brought him, and also add in his cooking there. We remember those who John during his life helped, and those in the past few years who have helped him. But especially remember yourselves and those here in other places, as your lives are all saddened by his passing, but enriched because he touched every one of you in his own unique way. John was certainly loved by family and friends, and it's always those that love the most that most miss the one they love, when comes the parting of the ways and clouds loom dark above. But tears will pass and your skies will clear, then you will smile again and find comfort in memories. The agony is great, yet you will stand it, because if you don't love so very much, you would not hurt so very much, but goodness knows you would not want to diminish that precious love by a fraction of a gram. You will hurt and be grateful for the hurt, for that bears witness to the depth of our meaning, and for that you'll be eternally grateful. As we say our last goodbyes to the earthly remains of John Martin Waite, each remember the times you had with him, times you may have even struggled and searched with him, but collectively you remember him for his love for you, your love for him, and his undoubted love of life. Each are obliged to listen carefully to the voice of death, but when death speaks to us, it doesn't say fear me or wonder at me or understand me, but it does say think of life and living, think of the wonderful privilege of life, and let us be thankful. Tenderly and reverently, we commit the earthly remains of John Martin Waite to be cremated, grateful for a life that has been lived and for all that his life has meant. Earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. You are glad that John lived, that you saw his face and felt the pressure of his hand. You cherish the memory of his words, his deeds and his character. Above all, you cherish his friendship and love. We leave the memory of John Martin Waite in peace. With enduring love and respect, we bid him farewell. May you find richness and examples in your memories of John. May you find strength and support in your love for one another, and may you all find peace in your hearts. Now, in a moment, we're going to finish the service with another song that John used to sing quite a lot. And then, whilst that's going, at some stage you may come up and place a petal on the casket to say your goodbyes, and then you're all invited to the foyer for some light refreshments. Thank you.
Am Brunnen vor dem Tore, da steht ein Lindenlaub. Ich träumt in seinem Schatten so manchen süßen Traum. Ich schnitt in seine so manches Liebe fort, es zog in Freud und Leide zu ihm mich immerfort. Ich musst auch heute wandern, vorbei in tiefer Nacht. Da hab ich noch im Dunkel die Augen zugemacht und seine Zweige rauschten, als riefen sie mir zu. Komm her zu mir, Geselle, hier findest du deine Ruhe. Die kalten Winde bliesen mir grad ins Angesicht, der Hut flog mir vom Kopfe, ich wendete mich nicht. Nun bin ich manche Stunde entfernt von jenem Ort, und immer hör ich's rauschen, du fändest Ruhe dort. Nun bin ich manche Stunde entfernt von jenem Ort, und immer hör ich's rauschen,